Hello, welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Matt Smith. And as per his bio on Substack, he says, I'm the guy that does the podcast with Deb Casey. In a past life, founder of Royalty Exchange, a jobs portal in the late 1990s, an ad agency, a marketing analytics business, and several niche publishing companies. I live on a ranch in Uruguay. Matt, thank you for taking time out this morning to come onto the podcast.
My pleasure, Robert. Thanks for having me.
We were speaking off there about the key question really at the moment about what is really going on now. So I imagine we're going to be touching on a number of subjects and taking either a 30,000 foot view or trying to get people to think about what may or may not have happened or what's going on. That being said, I don't think enough people have made a hoo-ha about what happened in Spain or Iberia last week with regards to the energy going out. And you shared a very interesting timeline with President Sanchez visiting China and some comments that Scott Bessent made. I was wondering if we can start there and you can deep dive into
Yeah.
that timeline, please.
Well, let me first, I find it very, before I explain, and I have no idea what happened, of course. I have no idea. And I don't know that, I don't know. I think there are probably people who do know what happened exactly, but so I'm not claiming to have knowledge of it. I'm just an observer. I look for patterns of things. And, what seems clear, I think, is the explanation for it. There basically have been two that have come out about it, and it's funny to me what they are. One is, see, they just went to net, they just went to all green energy, and then look what happens. So the failure of green energy, clearly it failed, and then so that's statement one, which is a reasonable answer. And then you have a lot of people coming out and saying, no, it actually was, it had to do with the sun or this atmospheric conditions or this strange something from it had to do something with with space, the sun, with cosmic rays, whatever. But anyway, the it's funny to me that both answers, what went wrong was definitely the sun. you know you know what I mean? Was either the sun because we were relying too much on it, or it was actually weird solar activity that caused it. And those are the two main arguments about what actually happened. I think Spain came out and said unusual atmospheric conditions, which sort of fed into this. And then you have all these people who do these sun watchers, that do these, came have are convinced that that's what happened. So I find it funny that those are the answers that we have. When it's a lot more likely you could have just one weird technical glitch, and a couple of inverters go bad in some place that cause a problem. I mean, honestly, it could be something more like that, you'd think. But anyway, I just noticed that I like to follow Scott Bessent. I had a really high opinion of him coming into the administration, just as somebody who is very smart and somebody who I didn't think had anything to gain by doing this. So I watch and listen to what he says, and he made a comment on sitting on stage during some post speech Q&A, talking about the trade war stuff, and he said that Spain was siding too closely with Beijing, and it was akin to cutting your own throat. Now, this is a guy who doesn't speak in those terms usually. He's not. It's so to you say cutting their own throat was weird. That was on April 9th. Then April 10th and 11th, the president of Spain goes and meets with Xi Jinping. Apparently, then they signed a bunch of bilateral agreements for trade. On the 12th, he gets back, and then on the 28th, this power outage happens. And could there be some foul play in there? I think that's quite possible. I mean, you got to remember, somebody did blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Could this be a warning? I have friends. Michael Jan is a friend of mine, and he said, I guess I think, which country was it? Ecuador. I think Ecuador. Yes. So a lot of Ecuadorian electrical grid had been installed by China, and they were having a spat with China about kind of a diplomatic spat of some kind, and then they had a blackout. And Michael Yan was convinced that that was a warning shot from Beijing to them to that they better play ball. So, if that's true, that that actually happened that way, it was just his theory. He can't know for sure. Then it certainly makes it more credible, in my opinion, that this could be a warning shot too. Like, whose side do you really want to be on? And you got to imagine hacking into these systems can't be hard. You got to imagine that it wouldn't be difficult for something like this to happen. Especially, you remember when it first happened, they said, "Hey, it could be like 10 days." Like they really didn't know. I was like, "Holy crap! If people are in the dark there for 10 days, it's gonna be rough. Like this is gonna be a real wake up call." So luckily, it was mostly resolved within the same day, and life goes on. But yeah, I don't know. I expect more of these things kind of are going to be happening around the world. And maybe it's because of our overburdened electrical grids. Maybe it's because of nefarious actors. Maybe in this global struggle that's happening now to pick a side. I don't know, but I found it interesting.
I think that it gives food for thought, and I think that's the idea of this podcast and this chat today is to give people food for thought and to get people to really think about these things. I wouldn't go putting all my eggs in one basket with regards to anything. So why a country would then do that with energy to an extent is mind-boggling to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Yep. Oh no, that makes sense. I mean, it's obviously I'm totally against people getting rid of reliable baseload power. I mean, on our ranch, we are all solar, but I'm still connected to the grid. I can just flip a switch. I don't feed into the grid and get the power back. I don't have a solar system like that. We provide all of our own, and then if for some reason it's not, I can always go flip a switch and I can have access to the grid. But so I'm a big fan of these alternative energy sources on the micro level. They make a lot of sense. As baseload power, not so much. I mean, obviously, I think it's a bad idea. But so that's a mistake, clearly. But I also think the time that right now, what is happening in the world behind the scenes mostly is a real struggle, and it's even hard to identify who is in the struggle. But if you take it in its most simple form, it's clear that the US policy is trying to decouple from China and trying to force other countries to decouple from China. And its reason for doing this is mostly out of national security concerns. That's why it wants to decouple. It's not the argument that they want to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., all that stuff. I think that's some of that there's some truth to that. But the bulk of the manufacturing that they want to bring back is the supply chains and the ability to produce things the military needs, not anything else, not consumer goods. We don't want to bring back like the manufacturing of T-shirts, really. Who cares? They want to make sure we can bring back, our own aluminum production, our own access to rare earths, our own ability to produce drones and munitions. Like those are a priority. So this is a national security driven decoupling. It's such a priority that they're willing to send the global economy into kind of a tailspin to do it. That's under those conditions, do you think that the national security establishment would not consider using tactics like this in order to ensure compliance from other countries? I mean, it's quite possible in that scenario. So a lot of the way, what you think is realistic or not about what's happening in the world and all the little bits of news and data we get about what's all happening, if you don't have a foundational narrative about where exactly where we are and where we're going, I think it all comes through as a noise. But in the scenario I'm describing where clearly this decoupling is occurring, it's totally plausible that this was done by, the US or US allies in order to bring, it could even be other EU allies, honestly, who want to make sure that Spain's not separating from them, going out and making deals outside of the EU. I don't know, but it's certainly plausible. That's all I'm saying.
I think that's a fair thing to say as well. I remember reading briefly about it, and a couple of things that also strike me as odd at the time were that I think it was three out of the five hydroelectric dams or plants or something were undergoing maintenance at the time in Spain. That strikes me as being a bit weird. Why would you have three out of five off at the same time? It seems a bit strange. And yeah, the main power cable came from France. French-Spanish relations, historically speaking, over centuries, not always been the smoothest, shall we say. So yeah, strikes me as a bit strange. And you actually alluded to, if you don't mind, the Nord Stream pipeline. As you said, that could have been a number of people
No, no,
attacking that.
I like the way Michael Jan says it. It was either the United States or it was space aliens. Clearly, it was one of those two. I think that's a good assessment. It was either the United States or space aliens. So you can pick which one you think is more plausible. And I mean, you hear just the other day, Trump said, he was asked this question by Zero Hedge, got a question, I guess, in this press conference he did,
Mhm.
and they asked him about it, and he said, he didn't answer it directly, but he said, "I'm the one who stopped it first because I wouldn't even allow them to build it."
Mm.
So saying he would have stopped it too, you know, but Biden did. I mean, but he didn't full on admit it that Biden blew it up, but he implied that it was a policy of the US to ensure that that thing did not function.
Wild, absolute wild. That actually gets us onto what we spoke about off air quite a bit, and that was what's really going on right now. And I just want to bring in an article that you penned a little while ago, and it's the hidden dollar revolution, America's new digital money system. Now, of course, people listening in Europe will resonate with things that the EU have said as well. So there's some very similar characteristics here. But let's go and take that 30,000 foot view of monetary systems and everything that's going on. Let's try and merge it together. What do you think is going on and why in terms of this hidden dollar revolution?
Well, I think that the monetary system has reached its the end of life stage, and I think that the Trump administration has taken a proactive approach rather than simply has taken a proactive approach to trying to have a say in what comes out of the other side. And I saw that initially as a very positive sign. But as I guess that whole piece, it was based upon a thought experiment. And I tried to, and I know a lot of like MAGA people or really pro-Trump people, they really, it's their guy. So they have a real hard time with anything it might be critical of their guy. And I'm not attacking Trump, but I just had a thought experiment, which is, what if all that we've seen in the last 5 years, what if Trump is merely continuity, not revolutionary? He's not working against a plan that was in place before him, like that brought us COVID and all these other things, mass migration, lots of difficulties, which I detail in this article you're talking about. But what if instead he's just continuing on? And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that that is the case. And so I broke this all down to basically three stages. And the first stage was the COVID, and that was
Mhm.
this stress test. It was crush small businesses. It got people used to stimulus checks in the U.S., where people just got paid to sit home. Um, it broke global supply chains, much like we see happening right now. I find it very interesting that when this first started to happen, like Liberation Day, I did a podcast with my buddy Mike Ferris. It's coffee and a mic, and I said it was right after Liberation Day, and I said, another way to look at it is it's embargo day. I mean, the U.S. established an embargo on itself, like we've had on Cuba forever, we're no longer, goods can no longer flow in. And it's like, I can understand some of the rationale behind it, but the way that it was done implies something different, I think. And so and it's recreating these COVID-like setups, with supply chains breaking, with small businesses getting crushed, with loopholes for major corporations. It's like, they roll out these initial things and they say, oh, of course, it doesn't apply to Apple or Dell or any of the other major tech companies. It's, but if you're a small manufacturer who relied on parts from China, sorry, you're screwed. Or, somebody who, any small business really, who everyone relies on China. I don't think people understand the reliance on China that the whole world has. So anyway, so to me, that's like, it seems like more like continuity from that standpoint. But beneath all of this stuff is the money. The money is the important thing. And, there are a lot of actions that were taken during COVID to start to set up like the digital ID with the vaccine passports, just that concept, start building out that infrastructure to get those things in place. That was just, and it takes a long time to do a big tech upgrade, right? So it's not something you can do all at once. So COVID was really stage one for that. And remember, Trump was part of that. It wasn't just Biden that happened in. But then you get to stage two, and stage two, things really accelerate. I mean, you have this, most people, the biggest thing that most Americans would think of with the Biden era probably would be like a sense of lawlessness and mass migration, which didn't really, which was totally new for the U.S. in the way that it was occurring. Although we've always had lots of lots of illegal immigration here, but this invasion, this facilitated, very highly orchestrated and financed effort to bring in at least 10 million people over a real short period of time, which, by the way, then creates and you have elections that no one believes in, right? So now no one has faith in elections. We don't know who's in the country. And now you have a reason to have a real identification, what they call the real ID, which they've been trying to push through for almost 20 years in the US. The law has been passed, they keep delaying it. Well, that actually, as of today in the US, if you want to fly, you have to have a real ID, which means like an updated version of a state ID or a passport, or you can't fly at all in the United States anymore. And the difference between these IDs on the surface is that they have a little star on them. You can't really tell the difference, but it's all is about what's in the background of that. It's completely integrated within the federal database systems in a way that they never were before. So in phase two, they do. We see the explosion of these stable coins. We see attacks on cryptocurrencies, but never really an attack on Tether at all, which is strange. The major stable coin, never. Anyway, there's more like legal framework put in place in the background. So that's really stage two. And stage three is the big one though, because, and this is, I think, what might be happening with Doge. I mean, I support obviously all of Elon's efforts to fight corruption and to fight waste, by exposing these things. Now we know that's in total, I think it's 160 billion, roughly something like that, has allegedly been saved from that. Not enough to make any difference, and basically all of it's going into the new military budget, which is also very interesting, what specifically is in that budget. But I think what they really did, more than anything else, is they did the internal technical upgrade necessary in the federal systems to make the whole thing work properly, including getting Palantir into the IRS database systems. So now you have, the Palantir. If you recall, they came into the news not too long ago because they were responsible for selecting targets in Gaza for the Israelis. So it's being done on automatically. So that is now in the federal systems. So you basically have, I think the way like this data fabric that connects all of the federal systems, can go out with an unlimited budget that the federal government has, buy all of the commercial data sets that are out there on locations and where, and you combine that with the real ID, and now you have real support of these stable coins. I mean, Donald Trump is launching his own stable coin. His company is, right? A lot of money in these stable coins. And I think you kind of close the circle finally in this effort and under Trump, where this digital surveillance grid, this which is part of the digital money system, is coming into place. And I think all this is because the old system was going to collapse anyway. It can't sustain itself under the debt burden. There are some ways with the use of stable coins that, like Tether is one of the largest holders of U.S. Treasuries, for instance, that help support the system a little bit longer. But ultimately, the idea is you come to a new money system altogether, a money system that's based upon these stable coins, fundamentally, that can be tracked and controlled, that they can gate your access to spending, they can, the level of coercion they would have on the population is so amazing because what you'd experience, I think, is just more friction in your life and tech glitches. And for some reason, the gate doesn't open for you and you don't know why.
Hmm.
You can't, your credit card payment or your payment to book your travel just keeps getting declined and you don't know why. Uh, so anyway, if you look at it as continuity, as a thought experiment, and you go through the entire process as I try to in enough of a surface level way without,
Hmm.
I didn't go too much into detail because it actually it doesn't matter, but you can see that there is continuity across the board where they're reshaping the whole world order. I mean, really, they really are. Everything is changing right before our very eyes. I mean, this is an amazing time to be alive, to see all this happen. And then there are positive forces at the same time as all this is happening that I think are really good that are out there too. I think it's totally off topic, but I think the AI revolution and robotics, all of that really will create, the third, or I guess according to Klaus Schwab, the fourth industrial revolution,
Hmm.
which actually is very important because we have a huge productivity enhancement can do a lot of good for humanity. And I mean, productivity is what makes us rich,
Hmm.
and our fake money system is what makes us poor. So if we had some great productivity come in, it could really, it's the only thing that's kept us from being totally impoverished since we've been living under a fake money system is the fact that there's been productivity.
I really enjoyed that thought process, and what I'll do is I'll link to the articles that we speak about. I'll link to them in the post that comes with the video and Substack post as well. Talking of monetary systems and how everything is at the moment, I'm sure EU listeners will be thinking the very same thing with, digital IDs and CBDCs and so forth, and what's potentially, well, I say what's potentially coming down the line. I'm pretty sure it will happen. It was just going to be in a very stealthy process. That being said, you also penned an article looking at how rich Americans or normal Americans were in 1910, and you've done this on the back of a book recommended by Matt Bracken and Michael Yon, and that book is The Path Between the Seas. Again, I'll link to this article in the show notes. But in terms of the examples you gave in that post and gold and so forth, I mean, my jaw was dropping every sentence I was reading because it's absolutely mind-boggling. We might think we're rich nowadays in 2025, but holy smokes, go back and look at some of these numbers from the 1910s and it paints a different story, doesn't it?
It's totally shocking. As I was reading this book, which is I highly recommend it. It's well written. It's very interesting. You learn a lot about it, a lot of unique characters in history. It's about the building of the Panama Canal, but that time in history was such an interesting time. This pre-World War I era was an interesting period of time. Now, you also have to understand that this 1910 was in the middle of the second industrial revolution. Okay. So there was a huge productivity boom that was happening in America at that time. And so that also contributed to the wealth that people had. But you have that and the fact that we were using real money then. And what confuses people constantly is we talk about dollar as if the dollar is the same thing over time, that's like a constant. And there are periods where the dollar was constant, but any number, but it's certainly the dollar in 1910 has zero resemblance to the dollar today, and yet we still call it the same thing. So as I'm reading this book, it's meticulously researched, it's very well written. He kept mentioning, dollar amounts of various things, machinery, the cost of, certain salaries for certain people. A couple examples I use in my articles. One is a junior engineer. I'd equate it to basically a civil engineer, junior, 2 to 3 years out of school, not much experience, but, let's talk about him. They talk about how much his lunch costs even, so there's lots of details in there. And every time there was a dollar amount mentioned, I write in the margin, just knowing that when they say, that someone was paid $1, that means they were paid 1/20th an ounce of gold, right? So just doing that, just put in the margin. And I couldn't get it out of my head when I finished the book. Because I didn't really run the numbers to see what it compares to today, but I was just trying to make notes of what that is in gold, on the side. But then when I went back and I, took the few examples and I did it, I was shocked at the difference. I mean, these people were making an enormous amount of money. This junior engineer, he had a salary basically of $3,000 a year. And we look at it now and we go, okay, inflation adjusted, we're using the bullshit inflation statistics. We try and figure out, well, maybe that's not unreasonable, okay? But the $3,000 he actually got was 150 ounces of gold, okay? He didn't get $3,000. He got 150 ounces of gold. So it's important to understand that they were the same thing then. So he got 150 ounces of gold. Now, that would equate to a salary today of $450,000. Now, to be in the top 1% in America, you have to earn a little over $400,000 a year. So this junior engineer was a 1%er by today's standards. But he was just a guy, and, you could say, well, he was working on the Panama Canal. So, and actually, a lot of people died. That was a really difficult job. It was whatever. In fact, despite the fact that Trump says 30,000 people died, I think it was 350 Americans did die, in that process, 350. It wasn't zero, but it wasn't 30,000. So he got essentially hazard pay. He got 10% higher salary than he would have earned if he were working in the U.S. So it's not like that's the reason why he was making so much. He was only getting 10% extra. And then there was another one. There were only 150 American women that worked for the Panama Canal during that project, and the highest paid one made $1,500 a year, or 75 ounces of gold a year. That's $225,000 for a telegraph operator. Now, in the equivalents today, so like a civil engineer today, what do they make? According to what I was able to determine, it's roughly 80,000 starting salary for a 2 to 3 year experienced civil engineer. And the other thing that's important to understand is that there was no income tax then. None in America. That didn't happen until 1913, also when the Fed came in. So that guy who, that civil engineer in 1910 who earned 150 ounces of gold, the equivalent earnings of someone today is 18.7 ounces of gold. I mean, it's such a shocking, remarkable difference in how what people are actually paid. So I was just trying to make that clear. And a lot of people, look at it and they go, yeah, but there might be other considerations, that you're not factoring in here. There's, somebody said, well, America, 50 years before that was the gold rush in America. And so maybe there was more gold and then that explains it. And I'm like, well, why would that explain it?
Mm.
If there was more gold, then you think you'd be paid less if there was too much money in the system. Other people say, yeah, but maybe its cost of living was much higher because things were more expensive. Some people say that. That's true. The average American household in 1910 spent 40% of the household budget on food. And the average now is 12%. So yeah, productivity does reduce prices of things, right? So you could see that happening, but usually productivity increases wages, not lowers them, right? Isn't that how that works? I mean, I'm not an
Yeah.
economist. This is my way I understand how it works. So anyway, so that doesn't really explain it. And there was like one little example in there, for instance, is this junior engineer, his meals that he would purchase in the cafeterias that were available to them, it was 30 cents. Now that's $45 in today's, using the same gold math, right? That's
Mhm.
$45. So that's a lot. I mean, he was paying a lot for a meal, but on a $450,000 salary with no taxes, it seems totally reasonable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So anyway, and the most interesting thing is some of the feedback I've gotten from people about this since then. Um, because for instance, this guy emailed to me, he didn't post this in reply, but he said it's not just a long-term phenomenon. In 2002, I was a new MD, just out of residency. That's a medical doctor. I worked for what I thought was an astoundingly high entry salary of $205,000. Priced in gold, which averaged $310 an ounce that year. I earned 661 ounces. Nowadays, I'm a well-seasoned expert MD, full partner in a private practice. I earned a lot last year from MD work alone, about 600,000. Price of gold in 2024 average dollars which is $2,300 per ounce. He says he earned 251 ounces.
Wow. That's just in
So in his career, it
20
goes
plus
from
years.
junior guy 661 ounces
Mm.
worth of gold to only
Mhm.
251 ounces of gold. And yeah. Anyway, so there's a lot of examples that people have sent me like this since then. If you calculate, and I really think the only way, there are lots of variables through time and space. It's hard to compare historically one thing versus another. Even in our own life experience, uh, this fiat system, this underlying lie, makes it very difficult for us to understand cost and value at all. Like it confuses us to such a great an extent because, prices are critical to market functioning properly. Price signals. Now, if the underlying mechanism that creates those price signals is floating abstraction, what does it do to normal market behavior? It causes things to happen that simply wouldn't occur otherwise. So it's highly distortive and it's very interesting. So I think the big takeaways for me with all this is that this article makes clear how fundamentally destructive the fiat money system is and has been to the wealth of people at all levels in the economy. And secondly, at that same time, it focuses this productivity piece that this happened to be during this period of time where an economic miracle was occurring, the second industrial revolution, great wealth, government not involved in taking your money through income taxes, and we hadn't turned over the production of money to a third party to manage on our behalf. It just shows you, I think, what if you really want to make America great again, we need the productivity miracle that we can get with AI and robotics, and we need real money, and
Mhm.
we need the people. We have to get rid of the income tax. I think those are the key things.
Point that you made there, and I appreciate that the people listening to this are going to know different things about different things. But I wonder how many people listening would have known what you said about Federal Reserve being inaugurated in 1913. And well, funnily enough, the income tax comes about in the same year. So I just want to just pinpoint on that because I'm sure some people listening would have put those dots together. But I think that's a quite a critical point you made there. So thank you for bringing that up. Tells a lot about our
Yeah,
current system, I think.
yeah, and still, when the Fed came in, at first, no, the Fed was they had to be careful because at any point, still, Americans, if they'd have gold certificates essentially, and they could go and redeem them for gold. Like gold was still money until FDR demand by executive order took all of Americans' gold from them, and then he devalued it shortly thereafter, the dollar in relation to gold. So it went from 1/20th to 1/35th of a dollar was worth 1/20th of an ounce, and then it was worth 1/35th of an ounce. Now foreigners could still take the dollars that they had and exchange them for gold until 1971. But Americans were forbidden, where it was illegal for Americans to even own gold. So, yeah, the Fed came in, but they really, really couldn't do anything really destructive to the money system until they took the gold away or the right to redeem for gold away.
And it's fair to say that those two changes, and again, I appreciate this is written in the article as well. So the federal income tax 1913, and then the end of uh, gold for Americans, as he termed it in 1933. They're arguably the two biggest things to happen. Or would you put the Nixon shock in there, or
The
1971? Would you
Nixon
add that
shock,
to that list, or
the thing about the Nixon shock is that's a transition point. But what that
Hmm.
was Nixon recognizing reality that we literally couldn't meet the obligations of the dollar, that all the dollars that were out there, and you know the and so just closing that because we couldn't basically was declaring bankruptcy more or less. I mean it was defaulting. It was a default actually. But I think what that did is then that sent the entire world into fiat, hell, and things have definitely accelerated since then. But the it was already happening to a great degree before 1971. I mean, the U.S. had already printed way too much. Other countries, I'm sure, were involved in that same sort of scheme. But as soon as you took that redeemability away, yeah, I mean, things got wild and out of control, and we see the results of it today.
yeah, I think it was French president at the time, Charles de Gaulle, had cottoned on to
Yep.
something, and he was asking for the gold to be repatriated to France. I think in the 60s, I think it was.
Yep. They were sending over battleships to load up and bring it home.
So he was onto something to say the
Yep.
least. In terms of looking ahead, and I know we've touched upon a lot of subjects, and you've gone in depth about trying to think outside the box about what's going on, bigger picture. I also appreciate that you are writing a book with your son at the moment, and of course you have, as you mentioned at the start, you are in Uruguay, on a ranch and so forth, which is great. Always like to give an optimistic and realistic side to these discussions, just in case people get a bit down from listening to what's potentially going on behind the scenes. So tell us a little bit more about that book, and also again that will work hand in hand with what can people do in order to just try and get out of the system and help to protect themselves and their families moving forward.
Okay. Well, let's see. I think the most important thing to keep in mind I mean, all these, it is really important to have a good hypothesis about what you think is happening on the macro level with the world so that you can understand the risks that are coming your way. Even as an investor, you have to have you have to have a thesis that you're operating under so that you can make good decisions. I just think that, and I think that um, everyone always has one by default anyway. So you just have to make sure that your thesis matches reality, observable events. So this, this kind of dystopian digital ID and all of that, like I just think it doesn't have to necessarily be dystopian, um, but it's coming. So you have to accept that. So I think having the thesis is important, and I think to be aware of what's happening in the world, way outside, far away from you, is super important to know. Just again, so you have situational awareness. But the truth is that all life is lived locally, and that's all that actually matters. I mean, what matters is not what, not that India and Pakistan are now, firing rockets at each other and shooting planes out of the sky, and or any of that, or what the Fed is doing, or it doesn't. Your life locally is what matters, and all of your energy should be focused into making that as good and beautiful as possible. Like those are all the things within your control. So that's the most important thing. Now, I mean, we are in Uruguay because I felt like with my thesis about where the world was going a few years ago, that I would be most unencumbered in creating the local positive life I wanted to here, on our ranch, doing what we do, reducing our dependency on centralized systems and all of that. So you can cut off I can have a terrible social credit score, and I will never starve. I guarantee you that. Um, so anyway, this is, think about your local life and focus on your local life and focusing on making it beautiful. I think that's the big thing to be positive about. From a practical standpoint, and I'll talk about the book in just a second, is that I really believe that you have to own gold now. You have to own gold. I think that all financial assets, or there are a whole range of possibilities of what could happen to the whole set of financial assets that are out there right now, from David Webb's Great Taking, which is I've studied it thoroughly. I know David. It could happen. Not to say they will do that, but let's just say if the mechanisms legally are in place, so if they wanted to seize all of your financial assets, it's possible. And the whole legal framework is there for it. So that's like the worst case scenario, you could have a meltdown in the stock market and everything else. It's just very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen with these financial assets, or they could be inflated. There could be a big blow off top with this stuff. So it's hard to know. But with gold, this evidence from this junior engineer in 1910, I think provides us a good framework for thinking about our own futures and saving some money in gold. I've always seen gold as savings, not as an investment, not as a speculation. But I think there is some speculative upside in gold now that hasn't existed in my lifetime, simply because there's a reckoning happening right now with the monetary system. And so in this, the Exeter's pyramid, have you ever seen that thing? So it
Is
has
that
gold on the
that's,
bottom.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's like quadrillions of derivatives on the top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to reorder to some degree. And a lot more of that value is by necessity going to flow into gold. And a lot of it is going to just simply disappear because it's credit. It's just going to go away. So a lot of wealth is just what people think of as wealth is just going to go away. It's not really wealth, it's credit, which is also credit is the opposite of debt, right? It's somebody, you know what I mean? So that debt is going to be unpayable, and so that credit you have that you think is an asset is going to be wiped away. So anyway, it's very difficult to predict. So I think owning gold makes a lot of sense as the most practical thing. We talk about in crisis investing, we like resource investments in general, gold miners, things like that. And we cover that in that paid newsletter. I think there's a lot of speculative upside with those. They're very cheap. In terms of the preparation, so here's the thing: is I have two teenage kids. My 19-year-old son Maxim and my daughter 17. She's Bella. And you can look at what's happening in the world today, and you can be like, man, this is going to be. It could be really bad. That's a hell of a way to look at the world, though. It makes it really hard to function. And if you, I've had a lot of people comment in our videos, the videos I do with Doug Casey at Doug Casey's Take. I've had a lot of people comment in those videos say, boy, I'm glad I'm old and I don't have to go through this. And I'm just like, wow, what a way to view the world. You're just glad that your time's almost done and you'll be checking out soon, so you won't have to deal with the consequences of everything's happening. I mean, that is it's a realistic view. I mean, if you are older and you are going to die soon, maybe be grateful for what you've got, where you are, I guess. But the downside of that is I have kids, and I'm not that old, and you're a young guy, and there's a lot of future ahead of us, and it's up to us to make it good. To make it beautiful. So this takes us to the preparations. And so my son, starting about 2 years ago, and he never really had much interest in going to college. And Doug Casey has, for more than a decade, tried to get me to write a book with him about what a young man should do instead of going to college. And I had no interest in writing a book or doing any of that. I saw no upside until my son was 17, and all of a sudden I started thinking, holy shit, like, what are we going to do? What's he going to do? How do we, how can I help him? And so I became very interested, and my son has been acting as basically our guinea pig for 2 years now. And essentially what it is, it's as I said, it's what someone should do instead of going to college, which Doug describes as a misallocation of time and capital. And I would say the money is huge because people come out with enormous amounts of debt, but it's the time is the biggest thing. This is designed for young men, this book that's coming called The Preparation. Because I think the situations are different between the two. So this is organized toward a young man. But when the age is between 18 and 22 or 23, you've got so much energy. You're so open to new ideas. You want stuff to happen. You want to move and push things forward. Like you need this energy must go to someplace productive. And it's putting yourself in a classroom where, in the US, to be considered a full-time student, you have to have 12 credit hours a week, which means essentially 12 hours of class a week and a few extra hours beyond that of study, supposedly. So it's not even a part-time job. What the hell are you going to do with your time? So we've restructured a totally different program where you actually learn real skills. It's broken up into quarters. We call those quarters cycles. Each one of those cycles has an anchor activity and lots of academics around it. The anchor activity is something like, right now my son's learning to be a private pilot. He's an EMT. He went sailing, learned how to sail with one of the best high latitude captains in the world, sailing from the Falkland Islands through the Strait of Magellan over to Chile. And now he's a qualified sailboat crewman. He's an EMT. In the U.S., EMT is an emergency medical technician, so it's kind of like a paramedic. They work on ambulances. He's done wildland firefighting. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different anchor activities, like I said, sailing, flying, emergency medical technician. There's a total of 16 of these different skills that you learn. Each one of them generate you income if you wanted to. You could take a job doing those things. Not to say you would, but they all have real economic. our society recognizes them as having economic value. And then interwoven within all of that is academics, what you should read, the courses you should take online, and they're all tied into the specific thing that anchor activity you're doing during that cycle, so that it makes sense. Because when you go through school, they give you all these unrelatable facts. They seem so disconnected. You know, it's hard to really gain any real knowledge, even if you can recall facts, that you were taught. It's all about, real knowledge comes from assembling this like lattice work of knowledge, these things that all relate to one another. So, reading about the, history related to that for my son, for that part of the Americas, about sailing. He read like a book about the pirates. He read, studying that at that same time makes it all make so much more sense. It all puts it together in his mind so much more than it would have otherwise. So anyway, it's a totally different approach. It costs a lot less to do the program than it would to attend a university in the US, to do these different activities I'm saying. And the fundamental goal of the whole thing is to actually prepare a young man for the future, a future which is incredibly uncertain, in which I think white collar jobs are going to be reduced dramatically over the next decade. I mean, this in fourth industrial revolution that we're going through with this robotics and AI, I hate to use Klaus Schwab's words here, but like it is going to change everything. In like 1870, if you'd been a small scale farmer, like your family had been in farming, had a decent property for a couple generations, at that point, you had probably the most stable setup possible in America. Like as far as financial security, life security, your prospects were bright. And then came in the second industrial revolution in the US, and most of those farms went bankrupt. Most of the people had to move into the cities. They started with manufacturing. And, so the white collar job today is that small scale farmer in 1870. They say the job simply will not exist. They won't be necessary. So there's this huge productivity boom that's coming. There's this huge opportunity that's going to come out of that. Productivity creates wealth. I mean, I know I'm jumping around, but there was a huge destruction caused by the second industrial revolution in America with, I said, the small scale farmers. At the same time, it was a miracle time where things that came out of it, including, being able to build cities. The Bessemer process for steel, for instance, was invented and deployed and made possible things that could not be done before, increased productivity dramatically. It changed everything. And then but it's not just that we got more stuff out of it. We got whole industries that you couldn't imagine before that came out of it. Cinema came from this era. It was not even something one could imagine before that. So there will be things that we can't imagine today that will appear out of what's happening. And to be prepared for that future, I have no faith that going and studying whatever degree might be offered at a university today, which is all looking back in the past at what the jobs we needed in the past, I doubt in any way that university is going to leave people positioned well for the future. And so what will instead? And I think being a young man who has experience, and he's been places, he's done a lot, he is ultimately, he's competent in many skills. He's confident at a level of like the real confidence you get when you know what you're doing, or you can figure it out, because you've done it before, and that they're dangerous. So competent, confident, and dangerous. And dangerous is the one, when I say it, sometimes people are like, what do you mean dangerous? Well, I mean, certainly you need to be able to defend yourself and physically, literally. And so my son is studying jiu-jitsu. among other things. Also, anyway, I think fighting skills are important skills for men to have anyway. It's good to have. It builds confidence.
Mhm.
It's good practice for you, keeps you in good shape, right? But it's much more when I really mean dangerous. I mean, there's nothing more dangerous in the world than a person who thinks for themselves. And this program is designed to produce people who have the ability to think for themselves and have confidence in their own thoughts because they're built on a lattice work of knowledge and real experience. So instead of leaving college at 22 with a degree and you had a nice college experience and a piece of paper that says you're prepared for the world, and then going into the world and getting your first job and realizing that most of the stuff doesn't apply and that most of you have to learn while you're there, but really not having the ability to even take care of yourself yet, not even having real independence yet at all. It seems like a tragic error that you can make as a young man today. So the goal of the book is to actually break down exactly how to do this. So we articulate exactly the 16 cycles one could take. We also show you how you could build your own cycles with lots of other ways. There are lots of other things you could do other than the 16 that we have highlighted. And then there's a whole philosophical core that's described in the first half of the book, like how the world really works and how you can successfully interact with it. So that's the book. Almost done. I've been saying this now for 2 months. I'm waiting on Doug to finish his part. He says he's almost there. He keeps telling me. So honestly, I hope we'll be able to release it within the next, I don't know, I hate to put a date on it now, but it'll be this year, hopefully in the next 60 days. It's really, really close. But my son has been the beta tester. And I'll tell you, I'm biased. He's my son, right? But I know him really well. In the last 2 years, he went from being a boy to a man. And as a father, that's all that, I couldn't ask for anything better. He's taken it very sincerely. He's done a great job with it, but it's turned him into a man.
I don't think you can ask for much more than that, can you? If that's the case, I don't have children, so I'm not able to put myself in your shoes as such. But I can imagine there'll probably be no better thing to witness that than that change itself.
Yeah, all the stage. I love being a parent. I love kids. I think they're wonderful. People should have as many children as possible. But and I actually think uh, on that note, it is the most optimistic thing you can do is to have kids. It is, and it's not just optimistic. It is the most uh, it's the best way to tell all of these engineers of chaos to go fuck off. No, I'm going to create life and make it beautiful. And I
Mhm.
think for that reason alone, it's worth doing.
Well, I like that. I like that mentality. I really like that mindset as well. So again, I'm, sort of early in our stage of marriage. It's things to, that we're planning for at the moment. So yeah, I look forward to putting the two fingers up to the world if and joining that mentality club, Matt. Just to just to summarize everything we've gone through. So we're trying again with the purpose of this podcast, get people to think bigger picture, outside the box, etc. What's going on? We've covered what potentially could have happened in the Iberian Peninsula in the last couple of weeks. We've then looked at the last 5 years in general. We've also looked at the potential of Trump being a continuation of what's happened before and not necessarily the savior. So again, good bit of thinking there. And then also we've looked at 1910 Panama Canal and people's earnings with regards to gold. We've also then covered as adults what people can do in order to help protect themselves. And then of course we've just focused on in particular young men what they can do and of course the book as well. Before I ask you to mention about how people can find you, how people can connect, etc., etc. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you think's pertinent to this podcast?
Well, you did a great recap. The only thing I would just want to reemphasize is the idea that your life is lived locally and that you should make sure that you're spending as much time as possible making that as beautiful as you can. You should definitely know your neighbors. You should definitely not live in the virtual world only. You should live as much as possible in the physical place where you are and have real relationships with people, the people around you. And I think today we get sucked in to these international issues, and that are very important, but they don't matter on the day-to-day life nearly as much as the things right around you. If you do not know your neighbors, but you understand a lot about the Pakistan, Indian thing, you're screwing up. You're making a big mistake. So live locally. Life is lived locally. Make sure you're living your life. I'd say that's the other main point I want to make sure is clear.
I'll probably use that as a headline for the podcast. Actually, I quite like that. I'll make a note of that in a second. You can be found in a bunch of places, as we alluded to at the start. You are the guy that does the podcast with Doug Casey. So every link that you mentioned, I'll put into the post that comes with this podcast. But people want to get in touch with you, communicate with you, network with you. How can people do that?
Okay, best thing, the biggest thing is crisisinvesting.com on Substack. I publish articles there. I'm not the only person who publishes there, but we have a paid newsletter, which is much more, it's investment oriented, and it's focused on resource stocks, which is Doug Casey's specialty. I mean, he's been doing it forever. He's legendary in that. So to get on our email list and, to get the articles that we've talked about during this, just sign up there for free. Doug Casey's Take podcast on YouTube or on Apple, podcasts, or wherever you find it is the other place. Doug, if you don't know Doug, that's a mistake. Doug's a legend. He's my hero and he's my friend, and he is an economist and a best-selling author and a very wise man who has a lot of very interesting perspectives on the world. And he's an older guy, and he's got a lot of knowledge of history. And his mind, he's got a 12-cylinder brain. I'm like, luckily, on a good day, I've got 6. I mean, he's a really, really smart man. And so the purpose of the podcast is basically me trying to share Doug's view of the world with others, just to get him to talk about, sometimes it's current events, sometimes it'll be, questions from members of our, subscribers. But I definitely think those are worth watching. It's very easy for people to get into, and hearing the wisdom of older people is very important. And today, this is one other issue with the preparation I didn't bring up, but I think it's a huge problem with today's system in general, is that we've never been more isolated by generation in our history. Mm-hmm. It's institutionalized isolation. The educational system does it. And one of the great fault lines that is emerging, just how they use in the US, they use racial issues or religious issues or rich poor issues or whatever. You're starting to see emerge like a boomer and versus millennial Gen Z issue, this wedge that's forming there. And all these are designed to divide people, anyway. I mean, these wedge, dividing people into different groups is very helpful for the state, I think. Mm-hmm. But it's a huge mistake. And yes, sometimes boomers can be ridiculous. I totally agree. Their perspective is, they don't understand that they were the lucky beneficiaries of the largest credit boom in human history. Like, they don't understand that. But that doesn't mean that they didn't work hard at the same time. And it's not really their fault that it worked out that way. And there's so much lost when young people do not have relationships with older people, because older people, unlike your peers are your competition. First of all, they don't know any more than you know, really, so you're not going to learn a lot from them. In most cases, you're not going to learn from your peers almost ever. And they actually are your competition. Whereas older people, this is shocking actually, if you are a stand-up guy who's got some drive and trying to make stuff happen, they open doors for you. They try and help you. Why? I don't know. I don't know. It's just something in our, like I do this all the time for younger people too. I don't know why. Like I feel like, hey, this guy's, I like what he's doing. I want to see if I can help him out. And that's been done for me many times over the course of my life. And so it's not just, but it's not just opening doors. It's the knowledge and experience and perspective that somebody who has lived a lot longer than you can provide. And so I know we tend to isolate ourselves by generation, but I think you should, as much as possible, try and seek out relationships with people that are one or even two generations older than you. And I think you'll find those the most satisfying and rewarding relationships you can get. And listening to Doug, you'll hear from an older guy who's got deep experience and knowledge and is totally philosophically sound.
As I mentioned a little while ago, I'll put all those notes into the show notes that come with this, and so I enjoy the readings from what I read. I must admit, tapping into that wisdom is probably the word that I would use. Is Yeah, you're not even going to be able to put a price on it. I think it's the amount of knowledge that you get from that, the experience is, yeah, you just cannot put a price on it. Matt, thank you for your time. I think that's been a very wide-ranging conversation. I've learned a lot. I've probably seen me looking away from the camera, making notes as well. I think that a lot of people can take a lot away from today's podcast. So thank you very, very much for your time. I look forward to hopefully touching base again in the future at some point.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate it.